my name is Mia, and today we'll be following along as my good friend Leah paints a lovely watercolor landscape. So the materials you'll need today are just your watercolors and two paintbrushes, preferably a big one. Leah's using a square brush here, and then a smaller round brush. And of course your cup of water. So Leah starts off by dipping her big square brush into her water and doing what we like to call a wet wash. And a wet wash just involves putting down a simple layer of water on your watercolor paper, and this helps prime your paper so it receives the colors a bit better. They'll basically stick. And next she adds in a tiny bit of blue to her wash and does a very light blue color that we will be using for the sky. And she makes sure that it's all evened out. Next, Leah pats her brush dry and takes her hair dryer just to speed up the drying process a bit, because often watercolors take some time to dry. And you always want to make sure when you're starting with a new color, or if you need a shape that has hard lines, that your watercolors are dry, because otherwise the pigment can bleed and will give you kind of muddy forms, and we don't want that in our drawings unless of course you're painting mud. In that case it'll work very well. Next, Leah goes in and mixes a slightly darker blue that we're going to use for her horizon line. And the horizon line is going to be sitting on the ocean, which is going to be in the very distance. And next, Leah uses a method called lifting, where she takes her dry, flat brush and lifts some of the sky pigment off in order to give the illusion that there are clouds. And we do this because watercolors are not very opaque. They're very translucent, so it takes some time for color to build up. So it's much harder to add white than it is to take away blue. Next, Leah goes in and mixes a slightly darker blue than the ones that she's been using, and this will be the beginning of our trees. So, the trees in the very background are going to be blue. And I know what you're thinking. Well, trees aren't blue, trees are green. Well, there's a fun scientific reason that objects look bluer when they're farther away. And that's because of atmospheric perspective. So basically, when objects get farther away, they seem like they're turning bluer. And this is because the blue light travels much farther than colors like red or yellow. So that's why whenever you look at mountains or trees that are far away, they look blue or maybe purple. And that's just because the colors can't travel as far in our atmosphere. Then she blow dries it again just to make sure that we don't get color bleeding, because now she's going in with a slightly green, kind of bluish green color that will be used for the next layer of trees. And now these trees are going to appear still kind of blue and mixed in with the blue background trees, but they do have some green now to them, and that's because they are now getting closer to us. So that atmospheric perspective means that now the green wavelengths of light will be much more visible to our eyes. Alright, and you always want to make sure you're working with a clean brush, especially when you're moving to a new color, because again, we don't want our piece to look muddy. We want it to look nice and clean. And here Leah goes in with another bit of blue to put a little island far away in the background. And she blow dries it again just to make sure that no colors will bleed, so it's safe to continue working. And now Leah's mixing another dark green, and this one's going to be even darker than the second layer of trees, because again, they are getting closer to us. And she's just moving her brush around in a way that gives the illusion of the tops of trees. And then she goes up and creates, I think she does three. Yes, she does three lovely tree trunks coming up from the darkest green. And those are going to be the outline for our main trees in the painting. now Leah is mixing a dark blue, dark kind of bluish green color that she's going to use for the trees that are closest to us for their branches and their needle bunches. So notice how she just makes squiggly shapes for the trees that are in the background rather than giving them trunks and branches. It's because we want to make our piece have a central focus, and in this case the 3 big trees in the foreground are going to be our focus. So we're going to add the most detail to them because we want them to be the most eye-catching. And now she's also using her smaller round brush and just kind of dancing her brush across her paper to create some little pine needle bundles. And it's looking super cute so far. And if you're following along, you guys can pause the video at any time if you need to catch up, or rewind if you need us to say something again. And now Leah's going in with an even darker green to add just a bit of shadow and detail to her trees. And this is an okay thing to do now because these trees are the main focus. We wouldn't have added this kind of shadowy detail to the trees in the background because we want these 3 to stand out. We want it to be the first thing that people see. They're going to say, oh, these are lovely big pine trees. And then they'll look at the background and be like, oh, there's a ton of pine trees. And it's all about changing that focus. This is a great example of contrast where values are different in order to create interest. Now the value of something is how light or how dark something is. So in this case, the trees closest to us are very dark in comparison to the very light background, and that makes us more interested and makes it more visually appealing to the viewer. Next, Leah goes in with a kind of medium green shade for some bushes that are in the foreground and speckles in some browns just to give it some color interest as well as some form and shadow. And she dries it one more time just to make sure that any new paint we're going to add is not going to bleed. Then Leah takes her small round brush and mixes a darker green shade, and she goes around the edges of the hedges in order to create some definition and some further shading. And this really helps the hedges stand out and also adds more detail to the trees. So you can see as Leah begins to do some speckling with her small round brush, then she decides that instead she's going to use the splattering method where she takes her pigment on her brush and adds a lot of water to it and then just pulls her finger back on the bristles in order to flick paint onto the canvas. So this is an excellent technique that is not only fun but really good at adding some interest and some texture. And now she's just going in with some final details on the treetops, maybe a little more shading and a little more definition. And it's looking really good. You guys are doing a great job following along. I know this is a more tricky tutorial because it requires a lot of patience and a lot of drying and blending, but you guys are doing great. Alright, so it looks like Leah is just about done. She's blow drying it one more time just to make sure that none of the paint will bleed or anything. But I hope you guys had fun watching and or following along if you did so. And we'll see you next time, alright?